We will now look at sentence problems. These are the things which can happen when you write sentences in English. The most common ones are fragments and run-ons. Let's start with fragments. So what are sentence fragments? It's worth remembering that in English, every sentence must have a subject, a verb, and a complete thought. If any of these is missing, then that sentence is likely a fragment. So to put it in another way, we can say that a fragment is a sentence that is missing a subject, a verb, and/or a complete thought. There are 4 common types of fragments in English. The first one is called the dependent word fragment. So this can occur when you start a clause or a sentence with a subordinator, like this word, until. Remember that any clause that you start with a subordinator becomes a dependent clause. So a dependent clause cannot stand on its own. Even though the words here are complete in their meaning, and there's a subject and a verb, we still consider this a fragment because here at the beginning there's a subordinator or subordinating conjunction. So you can't just write something like this by itself. It is incomplete on its own and it is considered a fragment. The second type of fragments is the ing and to fragments. So these are actually 2 things. Okay, so these things happen when we begin a sentence with an ing word, so any word that ends in ing, or we begin any sentence with to. So this problem doesn't have to always happen at the beginning of the sentence. It can happen near the beginning as well. Let's look at some examples. So this one, trying to find the best deals. So this is considered an ing fragment because we begin the sentence with a verb that ends in ing, and then we write the rest of the sentence, which by reading it, you can see that it seems incomplete because this sentence doesn't have a subject, so it's a fragment. Here's another example. Her reason being that she wanted to find the lowest price in town. So this one, even though this looks like a subject, there is no proper verb because you can't just write a subject like this and then followed by verb ing, right? So here, the ing verb appears near the beginning, but since it's not a proper place to put it there, you need some other word, maybe is or something, then by writing like this, it is considered an ing fragment as well. And here's an example of the to fragment. So to find the best deals. See, you begin the sentence with to. So maybe even this is considered a verb. You're still missing the subject. So these 3 sentences are all fragments. The next type of fragment is the added detail fragment. So this type happens when you begin a clause with words like also, especially, except. For example, including, or such as. So clauses that begin with these words are likely to be added detail fragment. Okay, so let's look at some examples, like this one, especially the apple. So you're focusing on the apple, but what? As you can see, there is no subject and there isn't any verb. So this is a really bad fragment and it's called added detail because normally we write something like this as an added detail to the main sentence, okay? Or this one, for example, cool weather. You can't just write it like this. This is not a complete sentence because there's no verb. And this one, among them, roses, tulips, and carnations. So even though you're giving lots of examples, it's not a full sentence because look, you don't have any noun or pronoun to act as a subject, and there is no verb. So these are all added detail fragments. The last type of fragment is the missing subject fragment. This happens when you write something and it doesn't have a subject, like this one, and sign the contract. So who signed the contract, you don't know. So you can't just write it like this. This is a fragment. And this one, then went on to win the tournament. So after that, someone or something went on to win a competition, but there's no subject. So it doesn't make sense. This is obviously a missing subject fragment. So these are the 4 types of fragments in English. Each one is missing either a subject, a verb, and or a complete thought. Now, the good news is that fragments are easy to correct, and for all types, you can just correct them by joining it to a complete sentence. So for this one, the dependent word fragment, you can do that in 2 ways. So the first one is to add it to a complete sentence. So just add in an independent thought. For example, you can say, until they hired a consultant, comma, the company was not profitable. Okay, so this is now a complete sentence, and it's a complex sentence, obviously, because there's a dependent clause and this one is an independent clause. So by just adding an independent clause, the whole thing is now a proper sentence. It's not a dependent word fragment anymore. Another way you can fix the dependent word fragment is to actually remove the subordinator. So the sentence becomes they hired a consultant. This is a complete sentence with a complete meaning as well. This is also another way you can do it, but the bad thing is that if you just try to solve this type of fragment by removing all the subordinators, then your writing will be less varied and less interesting, because you may not be able to express what you really want to mean. So it is better to find another clause, an independent clause, and add it to that dependent word fragment. Now, for the ing fragment, you can change it to the correct verb form. So instead of saying trying to find the best deals, you could write she tried. Okay, she tried to find the best deals. So this one is a proper sentence now because there's a subject and there's a proper verb. So that's the first way you can change. And for the second one, you can also change it by changing that being, so that verb with ing, into something else. So it could be, her reason is that she wanted to find the lowest price in town. So this is a proper verb now, and here's the subject. So this is now a good sentence. It's not a fragment anymore. Okay, or alternatively, you can put these sentences next to connect these sentences, these clauses, to a full sentence or an independent clause. And for this one, which is a to fragment, you can correct it by also adding it to an independent clause. So it can be like, to find the best deals, she searched many sites on the internet. Okay, so what I have just written is an independent clause. So by adding the to fragment to the independent clause, you have just fixed that fragment. Now for the added detail fragment, you can also add it to an independent clause. So you can write maybe, I like fruit, especially the apple. See, this is a full sentence now. Or for this one, for example, the cool weather, maybe you can add a subject and a verb. So for example, the place has cool weather. So just by adding a subject and a verb to the existing fragment, you change the fragment into a complete sentence. Or you can change more than one, or you can change many words. So instead of just adding a few words, you can change the whole thing to create another sentence. So for example, this one, among them roses, tulips, and carnations, we can write like, among the flowers in the garden are, and then you follow with these things. So instead of writing among them roses, tulips, and carnations, you just write among the flowers in the garden are roses, tulips, and carnations. This is now a complete sentence. So this requires a bit more of a rewrite, but at least it changes the fragment into a proper sentence. And for the missing subject fragment, you can fix it just by adding a subject. So for example, you can just write, see like this, and he signed the contract. This is also correct, but preferably you should have something in front to talk about that person, and then we can just use this sentence to add why he signed the contract. And for the last sentence, then went on to win the tournament, you can say that maybe the team upset the defending champions, full stop. Then you can write they went on to win the tournament. See, now it makes sense. So we add another full sentence, so an independent clause here, and then we add the subject to this missing subject fragment, and now it makes sense. Not only is this a full sentence now, we also understand more because we have a preceding sentence to give more information. So now these two sentences, when used together, give the reader even more information. So it's actually a better thing. Okay, let's now look at run-ons. So what are run-on sentences? Well, a run-on sentence is a sentence with two complete thoughts, so two independent clauses. However, it lacks a proper punctuation mark to separate these two clauses. There are two different types of run-on sentences in English. The first one is the fused sentence. So this happens when you write two sentences together without a punctuation mark and or a word. So here we have two independent clauses and we just put them two together without anything to separate or to join them together. This is a fused sentence. So the two independent clauses are fused, are joined together. The second one is called the comma splice. So this one is actually more common. It's when you write two independent clauses and you just separate them with a comma. But a comma alone is not enough in English. You need something else like a coordinator. So these are the two types of run-ons in English, and you can fix all of these by one. You can just add a full stop like this and then begin another sentence. Or you can use like a semicolon. So this is the second way. And the third way is to use a comma and then add in a coordinator, like maybe the word and. So windows were installed and walls were painted. This is okay. It's not a run-on anymore. Okay. And you can also use a subordinator. So maybe when windows were installed, walls were painted. So this is okay as well. In this case, you need a comma because the clause with a subordinator comes in front. And for the semicolon, I forgot to add that rather than just using the semicolon in the middle like this, you can also add in a transitional word and then comma and then the second clause. Likewise, for the full stop, you can follow the full stop here with a transitional word and then a comma as well. So these are the ways you can use to fix run-on sentences. So the first one is to use a full stop and then a comma. So basically separate these two clauses into two separate sentences. Or you can use a semicolon, which you can use alone or with a transitional word. You can use a subordinator, or you can add in a comma and a coordinator. Alright, so these are the two sentence problems and how to solve them. By being able to fix these problems, your writing will be easier to understand, and of course you're demonstrating your ability to write well and write correctly. So in standardized tests, you will surely score higher. So whenever you write, be sure to spare some time to look out for fragments and run-ons. Alright?